drawing of my house in the wintertime. I didn't have a photo to reference. Um, I've only been here one winter, so a lot of this I'm making up, but I was referencing a photo of my house that I actually got from the picture of when the house was listed, and it was a really nice angle, and it showed the fence in the front yard and the house, so I used that as a reference so I'd get my perspectives correct, because I can't make things up. I have to look at something real and then draw it. Having said that, I also didn't have a photograph of my daughter or a snowman, so I did a Google search and found an image of a girl about my daughter's age in a hat and a sweater, um, and the same with the snowman. So I referenced like three different photos and composed it together into this drawing. If you watched the speed drawing of this drawing, you'll notice I jump all over the paper because when you're drawing something and making it look real or realistic-ish, you need to keep comparing values, and it's always better to go light and then work back into it darker. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to cut out the sections of the full video and just zoom in on the snowman and my daughter and the fence. Okay, so here I'm just making some texture on the fence. I'm only doing light areas. I know I'm going to end up going darker later, but you don't want to go too dark at first because it's very hard to erase. So I'm just drawing the edge of the fence posts. I think it's called a Cape Cod fence. I have like a wood um, a wood picket fence with like scallops. And I'm referencing the photo um, of the house once again. I would just adjusted the light so you could see my lines a little better. Here I'm drawing in the bushes a little bit because I'll need to use that as a reference of how dark my values are on my subject. Okay, so here I'm just gonna kind of sketch in very lightly where I want the mouth to be, the texture of the hats, some shading, just thinking about where the hat's going to be. And all these lines will disappear. This will not look like an outlined hat. So you draw very lightly, expecting to erase it later or expecting to draw over it later. You can use line to help things look like, to give them shape. Like there's I'm doing these lines curved to give her head shape. And you could look at a photograph of a real hat, and now I'm making like braided, looking like a cable knit. Um, and again, don't feel like you need to make it up. Find a picture of a hat to see what one looks like. Find a picture of a girl wearing a hat. This is the ribbed part. These are not straight lines, they're curved because her head is curved. If the lines are flat and straight, the hat's going to look flat. Just lightly sketching, not going too dark. Okay, I'm kind of outlining the idea of where her hair is going to be. Um, I start to make a face here, but I'm not good at faces, especially if I'm trying to make it up. So what I started to think about is how can I cover her face with her hair? I was going to do fingers, but why would she be bare fingered in the snow? So I'm making it a mitten, um, and it's also not having to worry about the length and direction of fingers. Here I'm starting to just sketch in where her legs will be, and I'm referencing a photo of a little girl I found in a coat because I can't make it up. Okay, now I'm drawing some stringy tassels that again are not straight lines, they're wavy and have body to them. And I'm thinking about what part of what scarf is overlapping. And I'm going to make this also a ribbed knit scarf, so the directions of the ribbing will help um, show layers of and direction of the scarf. These ribs go this way. This part, the ribs are going to go this way. And then I have sections down here as well. The behind goes that way, and this part of the scarf, the lines are going to go that way. Doing some shading with the pencil, very lightly. Lots of layers, lots of values, and lots of layers, so I don't do anything too dark too soon. All right, I need to start working on the stick and where I want it to go. Again, I'm sketching very lightly, and you can look up photos of snowmen to look at stick arms. And generally, the as the stick comes to the end, one end will be thicker, and the end of the branch will have much thinner lines that almost come to a point. Just random directions. And the stick will end up being darker, but I need to do my values around it to figure out how dark I need the stick to be. Here I'm going back into the fence, and the what I'm drawing right now, it looks like the fence is outlined, but I'm going to end up shading in the fence picket enough that it's gray and will not look outlined. Like this one I'm working on isn't outlined at all, and I'll end up getting rid of the outlines on that picket to the right in a bit. Just kind of shading in a very light gray value to make sure it's darker than my snow. And this part of the fence actually ends up getting very, very dark. But it didn't start dark. I got to do different values and layers of texture and shading to get dimension in the weathered wood pickets. And you can't forget that there's pickets in between, in back of the girl and the snowman. Um, if you leave them out, you might forget about them. They might look glowing. So when you're thinking about what values and when you're drawing the other pickets, you should do all the pickets in the area at the same time. When I draw, I draw, instead of drawing a fence and finishing it and drawing a snowman and finishing it, I'm constantly hopping around and comparing values. So I'll get a gray value of the fence and keep um, hopping around the drawing, doing everything that's about that value gray. And here I'm shading using the pencil or the paper stump to blend this darker gray value into my fence, and I'll go back in with the texture in a bit. Okay, now I need to shade in some of the yard around it because I want to get rid of the lines that are showing the snow at the top of my fence post. So I'm just kind of using the paper stump to shade in uh, my lightest grays instead of using the pencil. This part of the fence will be less textured, so I'm kind of blending soft grays into the snow and into the fence back there. Then I'm going to go back in and erase my snow, making it a curvy edge of snow because, sometimes the snow drifts up the fence. Now I'm darkening the panels back in because I need the values of the fence pickets to be darker than the snow. And then I go back in and do some texturing in the front, always skipping around, doing layers of different values and different lines. Here I'm starting to dark in the right edge of each of the fence pickets because that's like the shaded side of the picket. Okay, so I erased some more for the snow, and now I have to worry about this bottom of the fence because I have to create different values so you see the snow in front of the fence. So I'm just drawing lines, and the lines go horizontal because this board is horizontal, so that's the way the texture is going to go. And I'm only doing, obviously, those horizontal lines on the sections of fence between the posts. And now I'm going to go back in with some darker values. And then since I'm doing the dark, I'm going ahead and doing some dark on the stick and underneath the snowman where his shadow is going to be. Shadows are kind of dark right underneath something and then they fade as they go out. So I'm going to do that to the everywhere on the snowman that has a shadow. And then I'm going to blend it so it fades out, fades away. Leave the dark dark right underneath and then kind of smudge the rest to fade it out. And next I'm going to um, shade the snow around and back of the fence so it's going to look darker than the snow that's on top of the fence. I have to get rid of those lines outlining the snow on top. So I'm going back in with my eraser and I'm like, I got to get rid of this because it needs to be white. The snow on the fence needs to be white. So instead of outlining it, I'm going back in and I'm going to shade around where the white snow would be on the top of each one. And it might be wrong at first, it might not look right, but I can always erase it as long as I don't go too dark. Okay, you can see I'm going back in with the eraser, but I'm going to use this micro eraser. It's called Mono Zero by Tombow. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but basically it's a well, not really retractable, push button. You push the end of it so the eraser comes out. It's a white plastic eraser. And I'm just erasing the tiny areas of snow back in. This is a great tool, especially with my daughter's wispy blonde hair. I could just like erase hair in, or people use it for cat whiskers. It's just a really great tool. And they come with refill erasers. Okay, so now I'm going back into the fence with yet another layer, using a darker pencil to just make some texture in the wood. And I'm realizing, wow, this fence is way too light. So now I'm just going to go over all the fence panels and make them a darker value of gray. I need to do that so the white snow tops really stand out. Using the blending tool once again to get a very light gray value, soft, for the snow that's on the ground in the yard. And I'm really thinking about the shape of the snow caps on top of each fence panel. So now this whole section, I'm just adding more and more layers to the fence and erasing snow and shading snow with the paper stump until I feel like this whole section is the right value. So I'm going to speed through this, and you could pause it if you need to. Okay, now that I have the fence, the value that I think it's going to be, I'm going to start shading in my snowman, comparing the values of the fence and the snow around the fence. Um, I'm shading in the snow in back of the fence here and leaving the snow in front of the fence a bright white. And constantly re-erasing areas to make sure it stays white. I don't want it to turn light gray there. Back into the snowman. Well, not really into the snowman. I'm working on the fence that's in back of the snowman. I'm just going to go darker with my darks, and then I'm going to do the horizontal panel that's in between the fence pickets. Just darkening the values and putting more texture in my fence. And now I'm going to do more of the snow to keep my snowman looking pop white in the front. I'm just shading in the snow that's in the yard back there, around the hat. And don't forget, whatever you do on one side of the snowman, you have to do in between the subject and to the left of the girl. So you have that same value all the way through. It'll help it look real. Bringing the value down around the fence posts too, so that white snow pops. More texture and layers of gray in the fence on this part. Okay, now I'm going to do the darkest darks on her mitten and underneath each. I'm just looking at what shaded areas of her clothing and of the snowman have the darkest darks. Constantly skipping around so I don't. Um, I'm just looking at this value. I'm not looking at um, the whole snowman and finishing the snowman. I'm just looking at the girl and the snowman and figuring out where the darks are. Alright, this is the part that's really going to make the snow pop. I'm doing my darkest value as shadows under these lumps of snow that are on each picket. And I'm not just shading, I'm making lines because it's a shadow on the texture of the fence. Okay, now I'm just going to sketch in the idea of where the boots are, and I'm drawing very lightly, expecting to erase most of these lines. It's just, I'm doing a curved cuff of the boot that I'm making up, and when I draw the boot in the background, her further away boot, that cuff will be higher up than this one, because as you go up the paper, the objects will look farther away. So her second boot, I'll end up making the cuff look farther away. And here I'm just sketching in the pants so I can start to decide on the value of the coat and the glove and the pants. I have to sketch it all in where it's going to go. And so I'm starting on the mitten and doing it ribbed, curving my cuff lines because they're not flat. And then I start to shade in the dark edge of the mitten, I'll make the mitten this one value of gray, and then I'm going to go in and just darken around the edges to make it look rounded. Here I'm using lines to make it look rounded. And then I'm going to darken in the edge of the mitten. And since I'm using darks, I'm going to go ahead and darken in the areas of the boots and the snowman that I use the same tone of gray, value of gray. And now I'm just going to work on different values of the pants versus the coat versus the boot versus the cuff on the boot and the mittens. I'm going to make all of these different values, different shades of gray, so they don't just wash into each other. I'm going to make the cuff on the boot a bright white. The legs are a cylinder, so is the leg part of the boot. So you're going to be darker on the outsides and brighter in the middle. That's going to make it look rounded. Doing the same thing with the mitten, blending the darks just to the edge of the mitten, keeping the middle of the mitten light gray, and I actually go back in and erase part of the white of the mitten. Okay, I can't forget about my snow. I have to look at the values of the snow to make sure the cuff stays white and the edge of the snowman stays white. So I'm just erasing and shading the snow, keeping the white edge of the snowman, and I need to know, see, I'm erasing again, making the edge white. And I'm doing this so I can decide how dark I want the pants to be. Okay, I just shaded in some shadows, and now I'm drawing in the coal. And even within these pieces of coal, I'm doing a darker gray on the outside. I'm doing anywhere the darkest shadows would be, I'm doing darker gray. Um, so those have some volume to them. And now I'm going to go ahead while I'm doing darks and do the darks in the hat. And now these dark values I made, I'm just using the paper stump to blend them in so they're softer and to get rid of the lines. Because I don't want lines on the hat. I want it to look like soft. Getting dark under that sphere ball at the end of the hat. And re-erasing the head of the snowman, so I keep my whites white. Shading parts, erasing parts. Okay, so her whole body's white. Her pants are very light gray. I need to decide on the value of the snowman scarf as well as her sweater and pants. So right now I'm just shading and doing some gray layers until I achieve the values I want to separate her shirt from her pants and the scarf from the snowman's whiteness. In this part, I was trying to draw facial features, but because I'm guessing, I'm just no good at it. I can't make things up. And her eyes and mouth were looking too much like the snowman's eyes and mouth. So I'm just gonna kind of blur out her face and make her hair cover her face because my daughter is Princess Crazy Hair. So I'm gonna go over her hair and the face and just make different textures within her hair. I'm also going to work on the snowman's nose here, erasing the carrot and drawing lines to shade the underneath side of the carrot. All right, now I'm going to work on the darker areas of the snow, the darkest areas of the snow, the shadows within the footprints. I'm not coloring in a whole footprint. I'm just kind of making a scoop mark where the wall of that footprint would meet the surface of the snow-covered ground. While I have dark on the paper stump, I'm shading around the snowman, and I'm going to shade in all the areas of the snow that are darker, keeping the snow in front of the fence the whitest white snow. Okay, now I gotta deal with this hat because it's the same color gray as my fence and shouldn't be. So I need to add detail in it since it's closer to us than the fence is. I'm going to draw the detail of the like braid texture of the cable knit. Trying to focus here. And in order to draw my values in the hat, I have to notice that the shrubs are the underneath part of the shrub is much darker than the hat. So I'm just going to throw that value in there and then get working on my lights and darks within the hat, doing all the bushes at once because while I have this black and I'm working on this value, I'm going to kind of touch everything that's that value. All right, now I'm doing the darks within the snowman's hat, and I will do some darks in the fence while I'm working on this dark with the dark pencil. And then I'm going to blend the hat so I don't see the drawing lines in the hat. Okay, now I'm going to concentrate on, I'm stippling here. I'm just dotting the paper stump that has some value on it and re-erasing the white parts of the snowman, darkening around the snowman so my snowman pops from the background, and then I'm blending some of the shadows and drawing some more values in the dark areas. All right, now I'm just going to draw some darks in the fabric of the hats. I'm going to draw my daughter's hat, and I'm going to make the ribs curved because they can't be straight. They're a little bit curved and on an angle. There's where the face is going to be, and drawing some darks just as the shaded part of her, is it trundles? Her curl globs. It's like my daughter has dreads half the time. So I'm just shading in the darker areas of the clumps of hair. And now I go back to the values in the fence and add another layer on those pickets because I need to determine the difference between the fence and her pants because right now they're the same color. So I have to look at them both and decide what's going to be darker and make those values. All right, now I got to work on the other leg. Like I said, the cuff on the back leg is going to be higher up. The bottom of her boot is going to be higher up than the other boot. And that's what's going to make it look like it's further back in the distance. Shading in the values, lights and darks of the pant leg. The legs are cylinders, so one side's going to be shaded. They're going to be light in the center, and then dark as it gets around to the other edge again. Not working in direct light. Snow days are overcast, so I'm not going to have very strong shadows, but I will have darker blacks on each side of the center of the leg. And now I'm erasing what's going to be the fur cuffs on her boots. The one on her further away leg is higher than the one in the front. That's what makes it look farther away. And I need to define the difference between the boot and the snow. So I'm making the boot brighter white since that's closer to us than that snow. And I'm just like shading in the snow here. Now I'm softly doing some grays, and I'm going to do some darker sections around the edge of the footprints. These footprints each have to have multiple values in them, or else they're just going to look like marks instead of a hole. Now I'm going to work on shading the sweater in and making a shadow, a slight shadow that are is the difference between her hair and the sweater. That way I'm not outlining her hair. And I'm shading her sweater, leaving the arm the brightest because that's what's closest to us. So even within the sweater, you're going to see several values shaded under the arm. And now that I'm working on the sweater, I need to make sure the values of the snowman and his scarf are different than the sweater. All right, so now I'm going to work on the ribbing on her mitten as well as the snowman scarf because right now the snowman is the same color as the scarf, and I really needed to define where the scarf is. So I actually end up making the scarf very dark. First, I'm just going to draw the lines in of the ribbing, and each section of the scarf, the lines go in a different direction, and that will show what direction the scarf is going in, as it layers around itself. Okay, I started with just dark lines, um, dark and light lines for ribbing. I didn't want to go too dark. So now that I have an idea of the value I want, now I'm going to go in and do the really dark blacks. And since I'm working with the dark blacks, I'm going to do the same with her boot, draw the darks in, and since I don't want lines on her boot, I'm smudging it with the, blending it with the paper stump. Doing some light grays, going over the snow that's in the yard because I need to separate it from her hair. I need to decide what value is brighter, her hair or the snow in the backyard. The snow in the backyard needs to be darker so I can see the snow that's on the fence as well. Okay, so now I'm working on the snow. I need to really let the snow show up on top of the fence. So I'm going to make my fence pickets darker gray. And instead of drawing, because I don't want texture, I'm using the paper stump because as the fence gets further away, it's going to have less definition in the texture. And I have to shade in the snow in the yard to be a very light gray, darker value than the snow on top of the fence. And I'm also erasing the snow to get my whites back at the top of the fence. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do the shadow of the snow on each picket. Again, I'm doing these in vertical lines because that's the texture of the wood. I'm not putting too much texture in, just the edge of my boards, and I have to think about where my snow on the ground is going to be and bring that value of the fence pickets all the way down to where the snow line is. Also doing the horizontal board that's in the back of the fence and looking at the fence on the right side of the snowman to make sure I have the correct angle of that board that's in the back. Okay, now that I got my snow how I want it, I'm going to make the value of her hair darker because her hair is going to be darker than the snow. So I'm going to look at that value right now and also work on the sweater, get my shadows in the sweater because I definitely want her sweater to be different values than her hair. So I did some dark in the pants, some dark in the sweater, and then I'm going to start to put lines in the sweater to show the direction of the bending of the sweater. Now that I have the basic values down for her clothing and her hair, I'm going to go in with the darks and figure out where the darkest areas would be. And that would be like under the edge of her hat, um, and on the dark side of her uh, clumps of hair. I'm also going to darken in her pants until I have a different value than the shirt. And now my favorite part of the drawing is this hat. I should really just do like a drawing of a hat because the texture is really cool. Um, and I enjoyed this part. It ended up being my favorite part of the drawing. Um, you could just find a picture of a cable knit hat on someone's head so you see the way the lines go, um, and the different values. I had a mini stroke and had a blood clot, still have it in my optic nerve of my eye, so I can't see contrast and values very well. So what I do is I take a picture of something, I convert it to black and white, and then I turn up the contrast so my eyes can see it when I draw. I had to figure out how I could, keep doing what I'm doing. I didn't want it to hinder my ability to create art. Now I'm blending it to just make it look softer, get rid of the lines. Do the same with the snowman's hat. And I'm going to shade in and darken up the scarf. And I'm just going to add some more layers of a darker gray in texture, not solid, on these fences, just more darks here and there so I could separate it from her shirt. And it's very important, if you're darkening the fence behind her, you need to also darken the fence in between her and the snowman. Alright, so now I need to work back into the snow to make the snowman really pop. So I'm darkening the ground again using the paper stump to make that snow look darker. I'm also going to shade everywhere the snow is. I can't just do one section. I have to go across the whole yard and kind of work horizontally and go across wherever that value is going to be. It has to be the same on both sides and in between the subject here. I'm also going to erase my whites back in and shade parts of the snow that are on the roof and the fence and the bushes, because those are all things that are next to the snowman and the girl. Okay, now that I have the values around the hat, I'm going to do my darkest darks within my hat, because now I know it's the color gray I want it. So now I could do darker shadows within the hat. So anywhere where it would be darkest, I'm making black lines right now. Also just looking around the picture to see where else I want to add any darks, and that's it. I'm done.